Okay, right. Well, thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. A very, very favourable introduction there. I'm sure most of you have been told by Nick who I am. I'm a current professional rugby player. I played with England for a very long time for the fact that I've only accumulated 24 official caps. Many of those off the bench. Unfortunately, I've been much of a squad player at that level. But being involved in that environment has allowed me to sustain the level in the Premiership that I have done for the last 15, 16 seasons now. Like Nick said, I went to university when I first embarked in a career in professional sport. So I went to the Ridings High Schools, now the Winterbourne Academy. Down the road, I was there the other day actually, opening some new 4G pitches. Very, very exciting.
Amazing. DC was playing for us.
Yeah, they're putting a new one there as well.
Oh really? Class.
I was in the Bristol Academy when I was about 15 and they released me. I got called into the office. I played with them for a season. They called me into the office, they released me. Thanks very much, but we don't think you've got what it takes to make it in top flight rugby. So I'm slightly disheartened at that point because for me rugby just started to take off. I kind of went back to school. I ended up going to university. Very much, I'd given up on the dream of playing professional rugby. But in truth, that was where it started for me. When I got to university, Bristol picked me back up again. I stayed playing the game. I played for Frampton Cochrane, my local club. They didn't have much of a transition into the seniors, so I ended up going to the Dings Crusaders, and that was where I started my senior rugby. And that was the big difference for me, where I was a big fish, capable at junior rugby. When I got to men's rugby, I finally found some function on the field. And much of my game that I can put out in the world now is what started back then when I kind of joined men's rugby. And I think the point of me kind of saying that is, this is an amazing game that we play. We got the opportunity to play, and it's really heartening for me to hear some of the stuff in Keezy's summary of your pre-season, what he wants for you next season, what he has seen from you this season, because so much of it is about just turning up mentally, whether you deliver when you want and how you want physically. Like, you can't always control that, but what you can control is that for an hour a week on a Tuesday, an hour a week on a Thursday, whatever time you get on a Sunday, when you turn up, you damn well turn up, you're there, you make a point of being present, you try and absorb information, because as soon as you leave, the learning stops. You're not going to become better rugby players, you're not going to become better at what you're trying to do as soon as you leave training. The only opportunity for you to get better is while you're at training. You need to remember that, because when you turn up and you're 5 minutes late and you spend 10 minutes mucking around, we have it exactly the same. We finished our training this morning. We got a game against Exeter this week. It's not been the greatest season for us this year. We're languishing in 10th at the minute. Last year we were top of the log and loving life. But training this morning, first 10 minutes, lads are having a laugh, having a joke. We're doing the same drills you were doing. Passing off the knees, left and right. We're still, all the drills that you guys will be doing throughout pre-season, we're still doing them at the top. You never complete it. You never completed passing. You're going to carry on kind of working on those skills. But what makes a good session for us isn't always the execution, whether the attack play works, whether the line-up functions. We only get better if we turn up emotionally and mentally. And that's, for me, that's such a big takeout that they've put there for you. And I'd love to see you guys buy into that, because I mean, looking across the room, you've got a massive bunch of players here. You should be putting out a great squad, and the season that you've had, 70% results. I mean, if that was in the Premiership, you'd be playing Championship rugby next year. Like, that's a big deal, that kind of turnaround. So next year, if you can carry that on, and more than that, if you can kind of develop your enthusiasm, that's what's going to bear fruit over the next season, the next 2 seasons, and for you as people as you get older and you stick with the sport. And for those of you that have got ambitions to progress into professionalism, you can't control that. Someone will see you and think you're great, someone else will see you and think you're rubbish. Like, you can't control what they think. What you can do is turn up every week, do what you can do to make yourselves better, and then don't get disheartened. Don't get disheartened when things don't go your way. You're going to lose games, people are going to be sick, you're going to get injured. That's life. But you turn up with enthusiasm when you get the opportunity, and then more often than not, the rub of the green is going to go your way, and you're going to pick up where you should have dropped it. And for me, that's the big takeout. That's what I'd like to see from you guys. I'd like to come back next year and hear about your 22-23 season and how you were 18 out of 25 games, you were 19 out of 25 games, that you scored 640 points and you conceded 400. So you're just pushing the margins. No one's going to be perfect overnight. No one's expecting that. No one's asking that. But culturally, you just want to try and push yourself a little bit more and push each other a little bit more. When your mates are fucking around and pissing around in the back room, like, you can take it aside. You can set a good example. So if you can do that next year, and then if you have me back next year, I'd love to come and see your results next year and see that actually you've made a step forward.
We'd like you back next year, Dave.
That would be nice. So I kind of skirt through a few things. I'm going to be around for a little while. If anyone's got any questions, if you want to know anything about life as a professional rugby player, if you don't really give a toss and you want to know who lifts most in the gym, all that kind of stuff, I'm happy to answer questions. Parents as well, feel free. You guys are the reason that this works. I've literally just come from my mum and dad's house. They live down the road. They ferried me up here when I was a lad playing Colts rugby and junior rugby. Like, they don't get anywhere without the buy-in and support from you guys. So whatever they achieve is 100%, as Graham said, is 100% down to you guys. So, and anyone who wants to know anything, if I can answer it legally, I will. And if I shouldn't answer it legally, then I might answer it later.
We've got literally, I think we've got a few questions from the boys that are, if that's right, Dave.
Yeah, sure.
Filmed them that.
Yeah.
So let's go with skipper Jacob. First of all, have you got a question for Dave?
Obviously, you talked about being in England camp for a long time. You fell under different coaches. What was it like the whole experience?
So I got called into the England squad first. So I've played for England 57 times, but you only get a cap for certain games. So in a warm-up game for the World Cup, we play against Wales at Twickenham. All the Welsh players get a cap, but the English players don't. You play against the Barbarians, you don't get a cap. So I've got a lot of England shirts that don't have a cap number on the bottom at home. And my first cap came under Martin Johnson. And obviously as a second row, that was like a big deal for me. I was very excited. He selected me to go on tour to Australia. I'd never been on a first class flight before, so I was dead excited. Big Qantas A380, massive double-decker airline. And I've come in, obviously, Dave Attwood, A, seat 1A. I was like, right, alphabetical. Who's going to be next to me? Very excited about this first trip. Wasn't alphabetical at all. Martin Johnson comes and sits down next to me, and I'm 20 years old, absolutely bricking it, like an absolute idol of mine. England coach just selected me in the squad. There's been loads of press about I'm going to be the next Martin Johnson, so I'm nervous as buggery. Sat here, I'm like, conversation, something. Nope, eye mask on, divider up, full recline. He is fast asleep within 10 seconds. So I'm now sat here and I'm a bit nervous, so I've drunk like a pint and a half, 2 pints of water, and about 15 minutes into the flight, I am desperate for a piss. And I mean absolutely busting for piss. And I'm now stuck because Martin Johnson's a tall man. He's slightly taller than I am. He's in full recline mode, and there is no way I can get past him without actually climbing over it. So now I'm 21 years old on my first England tour, sat next to the England coach, and I'm basically on the verge of pissing in a bottle because I don't want to disturb him. Thankfully, I've managed to get the eye of James Haskell, who's a long-standing friend of mine in the England environment, and he's kind of come over and have just like bundled into Jono. He's like, oh, sorry, Jono, I didn't mean that. And Jono's like got up in a piss, and while he's done that, I've skirted up to the toilet and kind of escaped with it. But from Jono, then Stuart Lancaster took over, and Eddie Jones took over. The coaching is really, really different, and that's what I mean when I say, even at this level, at that level, how successful you are is someone's opinion. and sometimes it's nothing to do with the facts. Sometimes they will say, right, well, we want you to put on 10 kilos, we want you to be fitter, we want you to do this better. And then when you do that, then there's another reason. And it's like, well, actually, no, now we want you to be the best jackler of the ball, and now we want you to have more line-up presence. The thing that made the biggest difference for me under all the coaches was starting to ignore some of that feedback and trust in my own experience in the game and trying to develop the things that made me particularly good. So I'm one of the best scrummagers in the Northern Hemisphere, and I spent a lot of time making sure that in that entire England squad, in every international team, there was no one who was a better scrummager than me. I became a student of the scrum, and I spent a lot of time making sure that I knew everything there was to know from a second row's point of view about scrummaging. Suddenly I'm in the team. So when you start to get an understanding and appreciation of what it is that sets you apart, when you work on that, what the different coaches are, what the different regimes, what they say, you're always going to be doing kind of the right thing, but worry about what makes you tick.
Brilliant, great answer, Dave. Federico, this is, he's in the Bears XL, he's a 9, he's got a ridiculous lid, as you can see. Right, Fred, over to you.
What's been your best moment in your career?
Best moment in my career. So, first cap is like a really special moment, especially at Twickenham, and for me, especially against New Zealand. Obviously, it's like a dream debut. One thing the feeling, you just can't get it. You can't really describe it. But when you get to Twickenham, any of you who've ever been to watch a game at Twickenham, everyone kind of mills around in the car park drinking champagne and wearing tweed for like the hour and a half before the game. Well, you're out there doing your warm-up and stuff like that. Everyone's outside, so the stadium's empty. And then your warm-up's over and it's still 10 minutes before kick-off, and so you go back into the change room. Suddenly the stadium fills, but you don't see any of that because you're in the change rooms. Then you come out for the anthem, you line up in the tunnel, the opposition line up there, you've got mascots, all this kind of stuff. And as you start walking out on the Twickenham, you hear the roar of the crowd. There's 80,000 people, and you can dress it up however you want, but fundamentally they're there to see you, what the spectacle that you're about to put on there. So it's pretty awe-inspiring, and as that happens, the pyrotechnics go off, the flames launch up, and then as the flames disappear, you see it on the BT sometimes when you're watching, they send the pyrotechnics, the haze of the hot air, and it kind of shimmers. Now that happens just as you're coming out of the tunnel, and the other thing is the empty stadium that you were in for an hour 10 minutes ago is now full of people who are all swinging Sweet Chariot and shouting expletives and all this kind of stuff. And it's so overwhelming, you feel like that noise is what's creating that distortion. It's a really surreal feeling. But for me, that was the most unbelievable experience. And it's actually only now that I've retired from international rugby that I've been able to kind of look back and be like, oh, that was cool. At the time, you're like, no, don't show emotion in rugby. But you get to look back on it now, and easily that was it for me.
Brilliant. Another great answer. Joey.
Who is the most challenging player you played against?
Oh, so much context. Challenging. The most challenging player to play against is Owen Farrell, because he's a knob.
He's a 10, mate. Was he spelled what? Is he confused.com?
Yeah, he is a knob. He's the best number 10 in the world as far as I'm concerned. But he is a colossal knob. And I find that really challenging because, for me, one of the most fundamental skills of being a rugby player is being a good bloke. And I use that term slightly colloquially, but actually with kind of a lot of resonance, because for me, a good rugby player is someone who's going to help his mate out, who's going to play honestly, who's going to play fairly, who, when someone goes down with a head injury, is going to stop the game so that it gets dealt with, who's going to help the referee make the right decision, even if it's not in his favour. And there's a difference between sportsmanship and competitiveness, and for me, he's on the wrong side of that. I think he would do anything he can to get an advantage, which is one of the reasons why he's the best is at what he does. But that's not why I play the game, and that's why I think he's the most challenging player. I think in terms of skill-wise, the most difficult player I've ever played against was probably Charles Pieta. No, it was Samuel Radra, because he can do anything. He can run over you, he can run around you, he can kick it over you, he can dummy you, he can do anything. And if he played in the front row, he'd be the best front row in the world, because he's got every single skill required of any rugby player in any position. So for that, I feel like that might come both of those.
Cool. Another great answer. Thank you. This is going really well, Dave. Seriously. They're spellbound. You like it. Why do you listen to him and not us, guys? Louis.
As you said, you've played for 16 years. What is your secret to playing at such a high standard for such a long time?
Be really lucky. I'm very fortunate, and I'm honest about that. I've had very few really significant injuries by a professional rugby player standard. I think I've been out cold under the knife 4 times, neck surgery, 2 knees, and I actually had a nose job. And that is not common. Most rugby players have a lot more injuries than that. What I would say is I did a lot of swimming in my youth, from kind of 10 to 20. Even now, I still swim a lot, and I 100% attribute a lot of my shoulder stability to swimming, because the range of motion and the strength through range of motion that you develop as a swimmer is really, really helpful. Most rugby players dislocate a shoulder, pop a clavicle, it's all kind of shoulder labour repairs and this kind of stuff. That's the most predominant injury for a rugby player, and swimming was a real key one for me. But the other one was I developed good relationships with some of the physio teams early on, and I was very active with what we call prehab. I'm sure you guys will kind of be aware of it, but things like you stand, instead of just passing the ball, you'll stand on a bow saw or a Swiss ball and pass the ball to each other, and working on the kind of micro contractions of your musculature around your knees and your hips means that when you get in compromised positions out on the field, it's just slightly more robust than it would otherwise be. And it's only fine margins, but sometimes that's all it is. So that kind of work, don't kind of fob that off because it seems like a bit of a ball ache. Sometimes if you do that kind of work, that's going to mean that you don't get injured and you manage to secure another contract. Because there's plenty of guys, unfortunately, who fall by the wayside because they pick up an injury and they haven't had an opportunity to play enough for the coach to give them a contract. So they'd be the takeaways for me: swim in and do your prehab.
I think the other thing is you've got these lads, a massive unit. You've got good genetics, Dave, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm a big bloke. That
Yeah.
helps. Yeah.
You know, the other thing is like Jake Pelledri. I know his father used to coach me. Jake, he's in great nick. He's like single digit body fat, 120 kgs. He looks after himself. So actually, the harder you work, the luckier you get. I'm a great believer in that. So I think that comes into it as well. The old enemy, Master Vernon. Well, half the old enemy. Where are you?
What advice would you give to your 15-year-old self?
What advice would I give my 15-year-old self? Buy some Bitcoin.
He's got about 60 grand tied up. He's got 5 grand today.
50% down in the last week.
Well, yeah, I'm compared to what it was when 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's a good
I
job.
still take it.
That's a good showing.
15-year-old me. I think 15-year-old me didn't carry a rugby ball around enough. I think when you look, when you play international rugby and you get to kind of mix with teams of other nations, particularly New Zealand, what I would say is when you speak to Kiwis about their kind of rugby heritage, They carry rugby balls all the time. When they're in school, they're passing balls around. When they're at training, they're passing balls around. When they're doing fitness, they're carrying balls around. When they're scrummaging, if they're not in the rep, they're carrying balls around. They're holding rugby balls all the time, and you really can't underestimate how important that is in terms of their ability, their dexterity, their ability to offload, to catch the ball that absolutely they had no right to catch. That is fundamentally because from the time they're 12, they get a full-size rugby ball, they carry it around all the time, to the point where it drives their parents mad, I'm sure, and teachers mad. But if you're really trying to work on your ball handling, which every rugby player should be able to, whatever position you are, get a rugby ball and carry it around all the time. Play with it all the time. Even when you're sat at home watching TV, you can still be tossing it back and forth, because as you develop the dexterity in your fingers to handle, when you get to the top flight, when you get out on the field, that might be what it is. That's what's going to make you more comfortable catching the ball or passing the ball. And for me now, I consider my passing very mechanical. When you watch some of the other, you watch Cal Sheedy when he passes the ball, he's so comfortable, it's so fluid. And considering I've played the game at a high level for 17 years, professionally for 16 years, like I still feel like my passing is mechanical, and it's too late for me to learn that. Well, at your age, you can still learn the feel and the contours of a rugby ball in a way that I just can't. So I think that'd be my big one for 15-year-old.
You know Dave Macko and Billy, this was their junior club. I remember them quite vividly around Thornbury. They always had a rugby ball in their hands, and they've got pretty good skills, haven't they?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's true, you know, what Dave said as well. Crabber, we've got another beer for you, Dave, coming through. Crabbers, is that alright, buddy? We don't want you to speak to them with a dry sort of colour. Yeah.
Like the long walk of shame.
Thank you, Crabbers, you're a gentleman, alright? Right, thank you so much for that.
I'll put it on your bill.
Master Henderson.
What was your worst experience as a player, and how did you recover from that?
My worst experience as a player, my worst experience as a player. One of my worst experiences as a player was losing the Premiership final with Bath. So we got to Twickenham, we played against Saracens, and Saracens don't really have much of a fan base, but Bath do. So we filled Twickenham with Bath fans, and it was the most absolutely magnificent occasion, and we fully capitulated and got battered. I just think emotionally we weren't where we needed to be, and I took a lot of reflection out of that, because I think we felt like in the build up to the game, the rugby we played that year, everyone was excited about seeing us play. We felt like we were entitled to win that game, and that was a pretty sober pill to swallow. That when we realised we got back in the change rooms after the game, and we'd been pumped by 35 points or whatever it was, and to have come so close, and then it felt like we'd absolutely capitulated. Like everything, all of the game plan that we've been so comfortable with all year, that we've been driving and doing everything we needed to do, everyone was doing the wrong thing. Everyone was running in the wrong direction at the wrong time. Everyone was passing the ball to the wrong person at the wrong time. And I think that really taught me that nothing is given here. And certainly what we do and what you guys do on the weekend, you have absolutely got no right to beat anybody. And if you are going to win a game, you have to turn up physically and you have to turn up mentally. Because at any point, if even one guy in the squad is like, this will be alright, you're probably not going to be alright. And actually that's going to be the game you lose, and that'll be the game that haunts you. So that was a bit of lesson to swallow me, but that was when I got it.
Brilliant. Master Verco.
What's the atmosphere like in the changing rooms before a big game?
It very much depends who's been picked. I say that because different people have different ways of doing it. We've got 3 or 4 leaders on physicality at the Bears. So there's myself, Sam Bedlow, one of the centres. Many of you might not know this. He's missing his front 2 teeth because he loves throwing his face into stuff. Kyle Sinclair, probably not a surprise there, he's quite an aggressive dude. Our job is to ensure that emotionally the team is at the right level to turn up physically. So if we've played a game and physically we've been battered, we haven't really turned up, we've lost all the contacts, we're getting smashed at the breakdown, we're getting the Michael taken out of us, you might say. That's on us, that's our responsibility. So we'll walk around before the game, you might see us if you come to Ashton Gate, you watch. Sometimes you'll see certain players wandering around from player to player, a quiet word in the ear. Sometimes different people respond differently, and part of the skill as an experienced professional is understanding who needs to hear what in order to get themselves to the right level. Because some people, they need to bang their head against the wall. Some people need to just have a quiet moment to themselves. Some people need like an aggressive, flirty voice, a deep, sultry tone in the back of the mind just to get them there. I remember one of my first seasons at Gloucester, and we're in the change room before a European game. We're playing La Rochelle, a game that ended up.
That didn't go well for you,
It
did
didn't
it?
go very well for me.
I remember that one.
6-month ban. But in the warm up to that game, we've just gone back in the changing room, and Carl Hogg, who was the forwards coach at that time, Scottish chap, very emotional man, loved to give a rousing pre-game speech, and he's got demanded all the forwards into the shower room at King's Home. We're all in there, everyone's geared up for it, and Hoggy's got everyone, and he's given this speech, and he is such an emotional speaker that he actually kind of dribbles a bit, kind of salivates on his lip, and you know that he's really going for it because he's like salivating on the lip. And at one point he's leant back and he's hit the shower, so the shower's come on and absolutely drenched him. So we're all in the circle, and it's like week 4 for me. It's early days for me, and everyone in the squad is like, this is the most uncomfortable we've ever been, because it's such a, everyone is like throbbing at the throat, like pumped up for it, and possibly the funniest thing that's ever happened, ever, has just happened to the guy who's giving the speech. So different people do different things, but we have different responsibilities. So Steve Luatua is walking around, he's making sure that the people who are running the game, the 9s, the 10s, the fullbacks, they have thought about certain scenarios, they understand what implication the weather's going to have. But then there are others of us, our job is to emotionally motivate people. So what we're looking for is someone to take someone's head off in the first 20 seconds. If that happens, we've absolutely done our job. All right?
Yeah, brilliant. That's great. Master trailer at the front, always.
Who is the most annoying player you've played with?
Mark Regan. Mark Regan
Is
and he's proud of that. He is an irritating human being. He takes pride in being irritating, and that was I'll be honest, he was the biggest letdown for me when I became a professional rugby player, because he won the World Cup with England. He was a Bristol stalwart, England international, a British Lion. When I signed a senior contract with Bristol, I turned up and Mark Regan's there.
Right, Babs.
Right, Bab. He not only was an absolute imbecile, and I mean imbecile, in one pre-match game, in one pre-match speech, he was tasked to take a young group of lads out to Grenoble in France for a European game, and Richard Hill was like, Ronnie, you've been around for years. You know you know all about European rugby. We got a young group today. Can you talk to them about what they can expect in Grenoble? Ronnie looks at him and he's like, here, Chernobyl, they got all 3 fingers and stuff back. Because Ronnie hadn't quite grasped that Grenoble, on the French side of the Alps, was not Chernobyl. But yeah, he took pride in being an irritating human being, and it was one of the reasons why he was good at what he did, because the opposition hated him as well. The only issue was his own team hated him.
Who was in the '07 World Cup? The the one that England lost. Who was the hooker, his opposite number from South Africa? Because I watched a group stages match at Stade de France, and they, like, the box walloped us by about 40 points. Well, what was his name, the hooker? Who? Yeah, I think it was Duplessis. He said Ronnie Reagan, this is Mark really calling Ronnie Reagan, as Ronnie Reagan was an American president. He said that Ronnie Reagan spoke to him more in that match than his wife had in the last 20 years. So this is a kind of a nose at the end. And he was out in Clifton Village about 3 weeks ago. He couldn't get in most of the bars. He had an RFU tie on. He's the man's a mess. Anyway, right. So is it? Do you feel like asking a question, big guy? At least this is a Nigerian print today. So, you said you had one prepared. George, have you got one?
What's the best advice you've been given?
The best piece of technical advice is going to be completely relevant to all of the backs in here. The best piece of technical advice is when you're scrummaging, the thing that's going to make you a better scrummager is generating more friction with the floor. So don't think about trying to push back more, try and think about trying to push down more. And if you do that, you'll get more traction moving forward. The best piece of slightly more global holistic advice, I would say, is don't just focus on rugby. If you do other sports, so for me it was swimming, I did a bit of athletics. If you do golf, if you do tennis, play some football, play other sports, because they will absolutely make you better rugby players. If your goal is to be the best rugby player, playing other sports will make you better rugby players, because you'll understand different dynamics, your body will move in different ways, you'll be more comfortable with different balls and different scenarios. But also, have something outside of rugby, extracurricular, that you're pushing as well. So it might be, so for me, I've just finished law conversion, and when I was younger, I did courses in plumbing and electrics, and when I was younger than that, I went to university and I read physics and philosophy, not physiology, but still.
I do apologise, start with a P.
Because when you get injured, your rugby progress stops. When you can't, like I said, you become better during that hour on a Tuesday and that hour on a Thursday and that hour on a Sunday. But if you're injured and you can't do that, it's very easy emotionally to feel like you're stuck, or you're not going anywhere, and especially if it's a long-term injury, you actually feel like you're going backwards. And if you've got something else going on, whether that's at the minute some of your schoolwork, whether you're playing tennis, whether you're doing something, whether you do art, or you play the violin, or you play the guitar, or so you've got something in your life that you are moving forward with, regardless of your rugby, then emotionally you'll be much more capable of sustaining what you do in rugby, because then those setbacks, they just won't hurt as much.
Okay, George? Yeah. Brilliant. Well, listen, I think obviously having Dave here has been amazing. Some real expert advice there. You know, don't let it go in there and out there. You know, listen to what Dave's tried to tell you all. He's played at the highest level you can, and also he's a lovely man as well. So let's give him a big round of applause. We're nearly on to the fun bit now, which is